think straight away is, are McLaren now number one team? Or at the very least, are they now the number one challenger to Red Bull's throne? When we look at the data overall in the last couple of races, it's clear that McLaren's on a fantastic trajectory and they're moving in the right direction. Each race can be different, each type of track is different. Overall, because it's a team game, and the whole package isn't just the car, isn't just the driver, it's car, engine, driver, and all the people behind, both at the track and obviously, you know, back in the factories on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, collectively at the moment, the number one package out there still is the Red Bull package. They are getting decisions right, and a lot of that undoubtedly comes from confidence. You know, if you're riding high and you're winning all the time, you are, you know, naturally confident. And we see that in a lot of sports, but certainly in Formula One, confident drivers are a lot more, and teams are a lot more expressive, and they don't take daft risks. They just seem to take the right decision at the right time. And I mean, anyone that's been questioning whether Max, you know, deserved that title of Hamilton, the first one, or last year because he just dominated it so much, and we have seen Ferrari right up there and taken a win. McLaren's been up there and took a win, and I think that it has opened up a lot more. So ultimately, you then look at which driver has then delivered and delivered the best out of all those races consistently. And you know, whilst it's a great trait to have and it shows they're nice, genuine people, it does make you wonder, is there a teeny bit of killer instinct there that's missing that perhaps, you know, Max automatically has just in the way he is as a person? Or maybe after the race, you know, keeping your head down, saying, no, it was a really good race, we were just unfortunate. Because I actually think that's the truth. I think the truth is just the way it worked out. Okay, you know, he could have easily been there or thereabouts at the start, and he didn't get the best of start. I get that. And that's obviously what he's kicking himself over. Well, actually, when you look at that first corner, he was never going to be ahead of George anyway, so he was always ever going to be second or third. So, you know, he still would have been behind one person, and he already couldn't pass George anyway when he was only behind George, and Max obviously got off into the distance. So, you know, there's always what ifs in any sport as well. And for me, you know, it doesn't matter how much Lando was sliding on the way out those pits. We'd already seen in the previous laps that when they had come out the pits, Red Bull and Mercedes were a lot better, actually. If you look at the qualifying, Mercedes were actually the best team at getting those tyres activated. And that's actually what jumped them ahead of most of the other teams in the qualifying sort of zone, because they were able to get that lap in and then go back for another lap, where Red Bull slightly cautious, but again, very much cautious for McLaren. McLaren went out there early, got their lap in, and then they weren't very sure. So they'd go out and then they'd go, yeah, we've got enough time on the board, we'll pull out of this lap, but you've already used one lap on that brand new set. You know, McLaren just weren't 100% comfortable on that particular, on those tyres in those conditions. And that goes back to what I just said a moment ago. The reality is, if you know, when you've been there, seen it, done it, obviously a lot of that Mercedes team have, but even more so your Red Bull team have, whereas McLaren are coming into that now. It was clear really that McLaren were definitely a lot more cautious in that qualifying. In the race, as I say, there was no way McLaren were going around that lap and the tyres lighting up straight away. It was going to take, you know, most of the lap before those tyres lit up, and in fact it did take almost the entire lap before the tyres started to give a bit of grip and allow Lando to start moving and matching his own sort of you know, little sectors. So yeah, I think really for me, it's hard to look past, you know, that Max would have got past him anyway there, no matter what. So it was a great try for him. He was in the position to do that. With regard to Spain, similar stuff again, really. Charles and Lando, I think they're sometimes a little bit too open with their self-criticism. I don't think it's a bad trait to go back and review and reflect on these sorts of scenarios. But what I would, have a little bit of a concern at, but obviously Max, he pumped in the laps too, and we saw quite quickly that when he was catching initially, there was no real flinching, and obviously a little bit of talking between driver and engineer, and JP obviously letting Max know, by the way, Lando's now doing this. Max knew he needed to up the pace, and I think one thing we did see last race, and I'm really looking forward to, hopefully we get to see it again this race and many more races as the season continues now, is those last few laps for those two drivers. They were all out. There was nothing being saved. There wasn't many more laps even we could have done in the end. It was when you look at the tyre deg and you look at how much their times fell away in those last couple of laps, they had pushed that car to the max to both of them so they could try and win the race. And that is probably the most positive sign out of the whole of the Spanish Grand Prix for me, is the main, sort of top drivers in each of the teams. They're all very similar in times on those first sets. On the second set, obviously the medium drivers were all advantaged versus George and Carlos Sainz, who took the hard route. But then when it went back to those softs, there was only two drivers that absolutely pumped in laps. But I think it was 3, maybe 4 laps from the end. All of a sudden, Max's times dropped by a second and a half, 2 seconds. His tyres are gone. And I think he would have been very thankful it was only another couple of laps to the end of the race. And unfortunately, though, when you look literally second to last lap, the same happened to Lando, and his times in that final sector, in the penultimate lap, his times on that last sector in the penultimate lap did fall away quite dramatically, and then immediately sector 1 in the following, the final lap, again nowhere at all. And I think it was a 1:19 something Lando set in that final lap, having been doing one low 1:18s, even 1:17s, lap after lap, trying to catch up beforehand. So dropping a couple of attempts with a bit of degradation is one thing, but to suddenly fall both of those drivers so far off does really point that those tyres had suddenly said, yep, we've had enough now. So I think there's definitely a race on there to have, but it had already ended. There was no overtaking going to be happening, because there's no way Lando was going to be catching. So the more laps they would have done, they would have gone further and further back and would have been swallowed up eventually. So I think the pair of them in the end give it everything they could, and it was probably, it was a fair result in the end. I think really for me, Max rode solid and got himself in the right place, as he always does, and that's what got him through in the end. So, but positives. So as I said, the positive to me is going into this weekend. And we now have Austria, fantastic race the last few seasons for obviously Red Bull at the home track, or one of the home tracks. And I think it's a race actually that Lando quite likes as well anyway. So race, obviously McLaren started to bring some upgrades now, infamously last year. It's a race that really opened up our performance. But it's also a race that we know has a very annoying track limit thing that really certainly set the tone of an awful lot of the race last year. I just feel like constantly times being deleted and people finding out after the race or the session had ended that they weren't where they were and certain laps have been deleted or whatever. It did seem if there is going to be such a strict track limits, there's either more of a dissuasion for drivers to go wide, i.e. they've added gravel or done something to the outside of the track on those turns to, you know, convince drivers they don't want to go that wide, or they've got a way of actually monitoring that line so it's a little bit more automated and a bit clearer and quicker to get those decisions in. In terms of the race itself coming up, I imagine probably every race until August, the Belgian Grand Prix, really, there will be some sort of mini upgrade or big upgrade from all the teams, never mind the big ones, but certainly the ones at the top. I think they're going to really want to try and hone in and be comfortable with what they've got and see if that's enough. So they have to then, they can then focus more on 2026 and less on having to worry about, you know, all these the rest of this season and next season, and that becomes, you know, a smaller part of the budget to give them a bigger boost in the new rules. So yeah, so I definitely expect some upgrades there. I think McLaren certainly sound like they're bringing something, as I say, and you know, they definitely have good correlation, and that's been the case since all their new wind tunnel and other equipment that they've been waiting for so long have come online. And that's a positive too, because, you know, one of the things we've been told as fans is for so long is we're waiting for our own, you know, equipment, we're waiting for these upgrading tools, and obviously lower cost because we're not flying to different countries to do it, it's all in our own factory. So that's a real big boon and plus, that the investment and everything that's gone into that project or those projects has really paid off, and at the moment it is really reaping rewards when we're able to create and design something and then put it into testing back at base in terms of our sim work, and then take that out into race weekend. McLaren, it's another track that I think, going off the last couple of races, it's another track that I think is going to be one that we should be fairly happy with. I don't think anyone's, you know, even if McLaren are number 2 to Red Bull only, I don't think there's any clear and obvious, you know, Mercedes early era, Red Bull a little bit more. Mercedes, we'll have to see whether they can then punch that into or dial that into actual, you know, performance in through each sessions on the weekend. And Ferrari, definitely not going to be their favourite track, but I really don't think they're that far behind. I really don't. And you know, if they do, you know, get into the weekend and find a good setup early on that they're comfortable with, when they do land it, they're going to be in a good place. It's just that, unfortunately, despite having a good platform, they're not always getting that setup where they want it, or certainly not where I think the top 4 are going to be very teams are going to be very similar again this weekend. I don't see too much of a difference. A little bit further back, great surprise to see Alpine back up there. Aston Martin, you know, I don't know what's happened with them at the moment, but they are not looking too bright. So it's going to be interesting again in that sort of field. Are we now seeing an Aston and you know, even Haas has now, you know, fallen a little way, but haven't they? So, you know, is that becoming an Alpine v Aston sort of battle for those last couple of point playing positions, and then, you know, everyone else behind really marshalling for the non-points positions? It's going to be interesting too, because it was a big jump from Alpine at the last race, and it definitely wasn't something that many people would have expected or predicted. So yeah, really looking forward to this weekend's race. It's also a sprint weekend, don't forget, so that will make it a little bit interesting and spice it up a little bit. So you're getting around that lap so fast, and you don't have that sort of long straight to use your DRS or use the drag and tow. It just doesn't exist in the same way there. So that is definitely going to change it a little bit. I think we're going to see, as we have in the last couple of races, these teams that are getting closer and closer, I think we're going to see a fair bit of overtaking again. So let me know your thoughts, and any of your questions or anything you would disagree with, you know, feel free to put it in the comments, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.